On my way out the door this morning, Cindy told me to drive carefully. She also told me to bring my walking stick with me, which is the euphemism that I use for my cane, because calling it a cane would be beneath my dignity. So when I fell flat on my face this morning, I knew enough to send her a picture by text so that she can get it out of her system before I arrive home today. Will there always be an Easter? Asked Joan Goodwin, one of the great religious educators of our liberal religious tradition. Hundreds of years from now, when people know more and travel farther than we ever dream of now, will there be an Easter then? She answered that as long as the earth rotates around the sun, as long as springtime follows winter, and as long as there are people who wonder about death and celebrate life, Easter will arrive with the promise of spring. Whether or not people will know more and travel farther, I'm skeptical about the former and openly doubtful about the latter. But as long as human life endures, I'm confident that the changing of the seasons will inspire awe and wonder, and that the coming of springtime will lead us to celebration long after the myths of past eras have been forgotten and the institutions we now know have disappeared from the earth. Every year, when the days lengthen and the temperatures warm here in the middle latitudes of the Northern Hemisphere, it is as though life were being born anew. Of course, the earth is alive even in the cold depths of winter, although plants and animals alike may be dormant. But the springtime unleashes a burst of activity. Seeds become seedlings, and our animal neighbors appear with a new generation at their side. We humans, who otherwise defy the seasons and landscapes of the earth with our technology, feel the renewal of life around us and get caught up in the season. For most of us, our spirits lift, our energy increases, and we wander farther afield from the burrows we call homes. Long before the religions that now dominate the earth even existed, humans celebrated the arrival of the spring. So it was inevitable that they would weave stories, even elaborate mythologies, to explain the annual renewal of the earth. In turn, each new religion sought to adapt itself to this natural, seasonal aspiration that we humans have. Everything in nature makes ready for the great awakening, says a prayer in the Beacon Hymnal, a Unitarian collection from a century ago. The cold winds cease from blowing. The warm breezes, gentle rains, and radiant sunshine clothe the field and forest with a new splendor. And the birds sing again their happy songs. Life is always renewing itself, and we belong to life. May our hearts be glad as we join in nature's song of praise. May we strive to be worthy of this great life that out of the old brings forth the new, and that every spring fills the world with springtime joys and glories. While this renewal of life dominates our consciousness every year in the springtime, the sense of being born anew can come to us anytime. Many of our Christian neighbors have long spoken of being born again, an experience that arises from their particular understanding of Easter as being inextricably tied to the resurrection of Christ, which is why I avoided the term up to this point, owing to both misunderstanding that might arise and the overreaction it might have been provoked among the theologically allergic. Like many fine metaphors, born again has been commandeered as a slogan by the self-proclaimed saved of the world, to the exclusion of the rest of us, that is, the damned. Although I reserve the right to claim a less judgmental name to describe those of us who stumble through life, and yes, I wrote that before coming to church this morning, who stumble through life with less certainty but more humility. If we're mistaken and the so-called saved are correct, I believe we're at least damned fine people, even if we aren't among the elect. I believe one is first born unto oneself for the happy developing of oneself, while the world is a nursery and the pretty things are to be snatched for and the pleasant things tasted, declared novelist D.H. who acknowledged that some people manage to live their entire lifetime in this spirit, which may well entail a kind of lifelong innocence, although it's more likely evidence of not paying attention or even denial. Most children I've known make the move from pleasant things tasted to getting a taste of unfairness, even injustice, while they're still very young. It helps to hone their young consciences. And for all of the world's prettiness, another Freudian slip, I'm full of them. For all of the world's prettiness, there is an underside of ugliness if we look at the places where the sun doesn't shine. Nor everything always work out for the best. Life is sometimes hard, and innocence can be easily lost. But innocence has its place, though denial masquerading as innocence simply perpetuates the world's injustices. That's why it's important to be born again on entering maturity, in Lawrence's words, and again, and again, and again. Or anew, and anew, and anew, if the language of being born again troubles you. We need to be born to humanity, born to an awareness of the world as it really is, with both its pleasures and its pain, its sweetness and its sorrow, its blessings and its bitterness. Maturity quickens our consciousness of laughter and tears, joy and disappointment, prosperity and privation. And conscience calls us to respond with love and justice, generosity and equity. For D.H. Lawrence, true religion grows out of our awareness of the world as it really is, not out of magical thinking or nostalgia for childhood. It is grounded in consciousness and conscience, and that leads to conviction. Then it appears to me, he reflected, one gradually formulates one's religion, be it what it may. A person has no religion who has not slowly and painfully gathered one together, adding to it, shaping it. And one's religion is never complete and final, it seems, but must always be undergoing modification. It seems to me that this is the experience of most of us. And Lawrence, D.H. Lawrence, was speaking for us when he reflected on how we all cobble our religion, our life stance, our philosophy together that helps to give meaning to our lives and a sense of purpose to our actions. Conversion, says Lawrence, not in the sense of embracing some new external, but in the sense of evolving spiritually and morally, comes when first one hears the low, vast murmur of life, human life, troubling one's hitherto unconscious self. Conversion comes in the springtime when we hear the murmur of life in nature around us. It comes in the autumn when we see the leaves fall and the weather cool, when the snow arrives and we find ourselves faith to wait for the coming spring, when once again nature will reseed itself and life will be born anew. That's what it means to be born anew. The idea that being born again is the result of accepting some particular Savior as redemptive, some doctrine as being absolute, some creed as being perfect, does a great disservice to the ongoing human process of discovery, discernment, and renewal. If we aren't discovering the world anew every day, each and every day, if we aren't reconsidering what is right and what is wrong, if we aren't shedding a piece of ourselves and reshaping our understanding of who we are, then we aren't fully alive. Sometimes these changes are incremental and cumulative. Sometimes they are sudden and overwhelming. But always they change who we are in some important way, and usually in some unexpected direction. The experience of being born anew comes as a surprise, and it often leads us to surprising changes and conclusions. Looking back over my own life, there have been many events that have proven to be tipping points, milestones where I can point to some deepened awareness or some life-changing decision. Some of these milestones have been born of sadness, such as the death of a loved one, while others have been born of joy, such as my marriage or the birth of our children. One marked a hard-won accomplishment, my graduation from university, while another, the ordination to the ministry, felt like pouring a cup of tea after it had been steeped in the pot for a very long time. I have no great call story to share about my decision to become a minister. It evolved slowly and quietly. I sometimes feel out of place at ministers' meetings when people share their dramatic stories of the moment they knew they were destined for ministry. I have no such story, It just sort of happened. Some of you may be sitting there thinking, well, that's been obvious all along. Others may feel relieved to think that some of the things that are most precious to us just come over us quietly and slowly, like a beautiful sunrise or a beautiful sunset. But there is one day in my life that comes closest to what I imagine to be the feeling of being born again in a dramatic, compelling sense. It has nothing to do with faith, at least not directly. It was born of despair, and I couldn't have planned for it. I felt born again at Inverness, Scotland, on the evening of Sunday, August 7th, 2011. I would tell you the time, except I was watching a David Suzuki special on memory yesterday, and I'm no longer convinced that my memory of the time is exact. But I know the place, and I know the date, and I can still feel the circumstance. It came at the end of a 3-week vacation that had taken Cindy and our daughters to Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Paris, Frankfurt, and my mother's ancestral village of Lingelbach in Hessen, where we stayed in the inn that was once the home where my great-great-grandfather was born. What an adventure it was. It was almost a perfect vacation. No one misbehaved, not even Dad. That is to say, me. And we saw many wonderful, delightful things. We sat in Monet's garden, and we looked at the pond that was there. We visited the Eiffel Tower. We hung out in the red light district of Frankfurt because I had not been careful in booking our hotel room in that city. We rubbed Hans Christian Andersen's bronze shoe as we walked by his statue in Copenhagen. It truly was a wonderful experience. And then we boarded the plane to come home. And somewhere between Copenhagen and Reykjavik, about an hour short of our destination, an emergency was declared on our flight. Now, I've flown a lot. By my reckoning, when this happened, I had already spent 3 decades flying, thousands of flights, and millions of miles in the air. Before then, I had been involved in 3 in-flight emergencies. But this one was unlike the others, because before I had been traveling alone, whereas on August 7th, 2011, I was traveling with the 3 people who were most precious to me. Not just the 3 people who were most precious, but the entire future of my existence on the planet. At that point, I hadn't yet convinced myself that I'd never be a grandfather, and what a surprise it turned out to be when, having convinced myself of that, I was proven wrong. But everything still lay before me. I was 51 years old. I was proud of my daughters. I deeply loved my wife. And about 40 minutes, maybe an hour short of our destination, an in-flight emergency was declared. Now, there's a bit of a backstory here. My younger daughter, about 10 minutes before, sitting across the aisle, said to me, "I smell smoke." To which her father said, "No, you don't. It's all your imagination." Well, in the course of time, we would discover that there was a fire in the baggage compartment, and what my daughter's sensitive little nose had smelt was smoke. And so a flight emergency was declared. The plane soared to 41,000 feet, a flight suppression measure. And then it descended to 10,000 feet, the altitude at which we flew to Inverness, Scotland. After the flight, I calculated that we diverted to Scotland to save perhaps 10 minutes on our journey, to get on the ground 10 minutes sooner. And so it was that we began a bumpy 40-minute journey to landing. And it was the worst 40 minutes of my life. Every conceivable fear I could have had entered my mind during that time. And so what I did was make jokes until my daughters asked me to please shut up. They understood the gravity of the situation, and it turns out that even dad humor can't counter the seriousness of such an occasion. And so I kept quiet the rest of the way. I desperately wanted to tell my wife and daughters that I loved them, but I couldn't, because that would have escalated everyone's anxiety. And although we often say when we are parting from one another, "Drive carefully," which is our family way of saying "I love you," somehow "drive carefully" didn't seem fit to the circumstance. And so I sat there in silence. I will confess that I prayed silently. I'm not sure who may have been listening to that prayer, if anyone, and I don't care. I'm not so proud as to say that I didn't do it. I prayed for 40 minutes. And finally, when I looked down and I saw sheep grazing on the hills of Scotland, I decided we were going to be okay. Because water landings are always treacherous unless you have Sully Sullenberger as the pilot of your plane, and we didn't even know about him then. But I saw sheep on the ground, and I felt confident at that point that we would land safely, even though I was watching us fly over the place where we were supposed to land. In hindsight, it was explained that Stornoway, our emergency destination, had a short runway and only one fire truck, but Inverness had a longer runway and 4 fire trucks, all of which were deployed to race alongside the plane as we came to the ground. It was one of the most joyous experiences of my life to actually touch ground. The plane disembarked in an orderly fashion. I kissed the ground, intentionally, not like this morning. I kissed the ground, and we went inside to be processed by immigration and to await our replacement flight. I was astonished at how many people chose to seize on this occasion as a time to complain about the inconvenience of their disrupted journey, to think about the connecting flights they would miss, and to complain about the airline, because none of those thoughts entered my mind. The staff at the Inverness airport, where all of the concessions were closed, came back to look after the people on the emergency landing flight. And they cared for us well. I bought my own tam with red hair stitched into it. I headed to the bar where I sampled every variety of scotch that they had on the shelf. When in Scotland, do as the locals, and everyone was chased with a refreshing glass of beer. I don't fully remember the flight to Reykjavik after our replacement plane arrived, but I do recognize that I was overcome with a change that has been lasting. Since August 7th, 2011, the anxiety that used to trouble me has all but been gone. The worries I had, I don't bear anymore. I'd like to say, though not tested, that my anxiety about death has evaporated. Because on that strange day, those strange circumstances, which I tell you about not to frighten you, but to show you how surprisingly we can be transformed almost instantaneously. On that occasion, my worldview changed. I thought I'd had it all worked out before then. My careful philosophy of life, my reasoned conclusion about truth and fiction. But something changed in me that day, and I didn't reason my way into it. I didn't have a traditional kind of conversion experience, but my soul has been calmer ever since that day, and my approach to living was fundamentally transformed. I no longer care about many of the things that once vexed me. I look forward to each and every day. And while I have spent my whole ministerial career describing how life is a gift, it has only been since that day in 2011 that I feel it deep inside. And in the same way that a communion wafer is for some a symbol of a grand dinner that occurred in an upper room long ago, the springtime for me is an epitome, a symbol of that sense of life and its giftedness that I experienced on that day. And so the intimation of being born anew comes to us each year in the spring, as it came to me powerfully on an August day. Just as spring cleaning, for those who will still indulge in this annual ritual, refreshes our home each year, so too the sense of being born anew in the springtime refreshes our spirits. Some years it may offer merely an added bounce to our step, or lift us briefly from despair. Other years we may feel transformed, as though we were truly someone new, someone different, someone better, someone deeper than we had once been. And when enough of us are born anew at the same time, the contagion may even affect the whole of society for the better. But today I leave you with these words from Janet Bowring, another great liberal religious educator. In quickening streams and warming earth, in buds and rootlets groping blind, the world awaits and brings to birth eternal hopes to humankind. The aeons pass in cadence slow, ideas from the centuries roam, but all life forces blend and flow. We harvest thoughts by others sown. Each generation tries anew, and people venture to explore old wisdom clad in raiment new, fresh insight found in ancient lore. A beacon from a far-off star may touch a light-year distant soul. A deed unmarked can travel far and work to make a stranger whole. Great good was wrought in ages past when love and faith all wrongs were hurled. So dare to change while life shall last. Take hold and shake a dormant world. The closing hymn is number 301, Touch the Earth, Reach the Sky.